Now, after this, look, whenever there's a numerical, we're talking about numbers, right? That means that there's either extra chromosome is there, or there is a less of a chromosome is there. So there is it could be. So normally it's 46, right? But maybe there's 45 or maybe 47 is there, right? So in that case, that means there's a numerical problem. The problem is a number, right? It's a number game. So if that is a problem, then we call them a euploidy, right? So you could have a numerical, you could have something called n-ploidy, right? This is called aneuploidy, right? This is what it means. So aneuploidy, N is referring as a gain or loss of this, right? So those aneuploidies there, and this aneuploidy can be because there is an extra chromosome is there, or there is a what? Extra chromosome is there, or there is a less chromosome is there. Whenever we talk aneuploidy, this aneuploidy can be, look, this aneuploidy can be further categorized, right? We can simply say this one is a further categorized in a two condition right here. We can say these are, it could be monosomy, right? This could be like monosomy, or it could be, let's just say this could be a trisomy, right? Now, what does this mean? Like whenever there is a, let's just say, if you're missing like one chromosome, like extra chromosome, right? You're missing, not extra, you're missing a chromosome, right? If you're missing a chromosome, normally it should be what? It should be 46, right? It should be what? It should be, this should be 46, right? Normally, so it would be 2n would be 2 times 23 is what? 46, right? But instead of this happening, you have 2n minus 1. So maybe you'll be missing a chromosome, right? If that is the case, then we call them a monosomy, right? Because there's a single, mono is one single, right? You're missing one chromosome. If the tri is there, that means that there's extra chromosome is there. So for example, usually, what do we say? For male, for female, we say it's XX, right? And the male, we say it's XY, right? So sometimes what happens is that instead of having XXX, maybe there's only one X is there. Like in the monosomy here, example, maybe one X. That's the only thing. Other one is not present. It's called XO, right? And here, it should be like, here you have maybe X, you have another X there, and also Y. Look at this. See, you have 3 of them, right? That's why we call them a tri. There's an extra chromosome is there, right? So whenever, again, if you're missing chromosomes, or there's a gain of, or there's extra chromosome, or additional chromosome is there, we call them aneuploidy, which comes a numerical disorder, which is a part of chromosomal abnormalities. We study that in cytogenetics, right? That's all something that you have to remember. Now, this monosomy you can further categorize into like basically 2 categories here. Either disorder has to do autosomal, or maybe this is a sex linked, right? Remember, if you're talking autosomal, whenever we say autosomal, again, this is something that you have to remember. If your chromosome is from like 1 to 22, right? Any chromosome that falls from, because there are 46 chromosomes, right? But the chromosome from 1 to 21, we call them autosomes, right? Those are autosomal chromosomes, right? So that means that whenever we talk about autosomal, there has to be problem or mutations or defects in these autosomal chromosomes, like chromosome number 1 to 22, okay? That's what it means. And in this case, these are monosomy, right? And I described what monosomy is that. Whenever we're talking about sex linked, right? There is a one condition that you have to remember this. This is where this comes in, where there's a, this chromosome X, one chromosome missing, and usually this is there are, how many chromosomes are present? Instead of having 46, there are 45. So you have 45 comma XO, X, there's only one comma, 45 comma, and there's XO, right? Because O is referring as they're missing a chromosome, right? These conditions is basically, it's one important condition you have to remember. This is called Turner syndrome. You must remember this. And this is caused by the numerical, okay? Now, what about the monosomy, right? Monosomy, autosomal 1 to 22. What if there is a defect in any of this chromosome? You must remember this, that if there's a monosomy, autosomal defects, it's not compatible with life. It's not compatible with life. Please remember this. It is very, very important that you must remember this. It's not compatible with life. It's because, remember, the reason why it's not compatible with life, the monosomy, this autosomal, right, aneuploidy, it's not compatible with life because usually it has a higher risk for basically expressing the recessive genes, okay? Recessive gene. So it's because of this, right? What happens is that if the recessive is this, then usually they'll produce basically altered or basically mutated enzymes, like functional enzymes, right? So it's because if these enzymes are not there, if not functional not there, it is not compatible, it's lethal. So it is very important that you have to remember that autosomal monosomy, right? It's not compatible life, it's lethal. Okay, that's something that you remember. When it comes to sex-linked, which falls in monosomy, you have to remember the 45 axial, which has to do with the numerical chromosomal abnormalities. Majority of the cases, but there's an exceptions. And then your step one loves to ask you these questions on. Everybody knows this, that there's a numerical defect on this Turner syndrome, but some students also know this, that this Turner syndrome, not only it can be caused by numerical, but sometimes, it can also be caused by structural abnormalities. And you need to remember this, because we'll talk about remember, chromosomal abnormalities could be numerical, could be structural, right? And it could be, and this Turner syndrome not only can be caused by the numerical, but it can also be caused by structural abnormality. Especially, there is a concept called, this is called mosaicism. And we'll talk about what mosaicism is, right? That's very, very important. This mosaicism, it is associated with this, something called giving a rise to Turner syndrome. And you must remember the whole concept of the mosaicism, right? That can also cause Turner syndrome. Very, very, very important. All right? Very important. And we'll talk each one of them too. But this is just a brief. Now, let's talk about, remember, aneuploidy can be monosomy, we just talked about, but it can be trisomy, right? Now let's talk about what this trisomy means. Remember, again, we have to categorize into, okay, let's just say this trisomy is there, right? And we'll just divide like this. And we'll just write down, all right, this time I'll write down, let's just say, right down here, we'll write down sex-linked, right? And then here we'll write down autosomal. Remember this again, autosomal, right? Again, the chromosome number from 1 to 22, right? Now, the sex-linked, this means that there is what? Extra chromosomes, right? There's another one condition which is called 40, instead of having 46, they have 47, maybe XXY. Remember, you probably know this condition. This is called Klinefelter, right? Syndrome. And this is part of a sex-linked, right? This comes in there. There's other condition which are called super male disorders, like or super female and all that stuff too. But what is more important in this is that, I'm not going to write that down, but this one you must remember this. I'll write down what you have to remember, all right? Now we'll talk about autosomal this. Let's talk about this autosomal disorders, right? In these autosomal disorders, right, you have to remember there are 3 important disorders, right? Very, very important disorders. Now, this autosomal which falls in trisomy, right? These ones are, do you know how to spell? Okay, 13, you probably know 18, and you probably know 21, right? That means that this chromosome that involves 13, 18, and 21. Now, whenever we talk about this chromosome number 13, right? We're talking about this chromosomal 13, right? There's a condition called, all right? This autosomal, right? This is called Patau syndrome, all right? That involves chromosome 13, right? Or this 18 is called Edward syndrome. And then 21 is called Down syndrome. Look, these 3 are numerical disorders, right? But there are exceptions to which I'll tell you this. There's the one way you can remember this. P is referring as puberty. You start your puberty around the 13 age. Elections, E, at 18, so Edward syndromes. 21, you can drink, so that's a Down syndromes, right? Remember, there's a numerical disorders, right? You must remember. Now, on top of this, there are autosomal trisomy, right? Remember, autosomal monosomy is not compatible with life. That is important. The trisomy, these 3, right, can be compatible with life, right? It's still a lethal problems. But if there's any other in autosomal chromosome, except from this 13, 18, 21, if there's any other chromosome involved, let's say 7 or let's say 8, right? Any other chromosome besides the 3, those are not compatible with life, okay? Because if you have extra chromosome, meaning that means there's extra gain of function is there. That means that it's going to have increased, that enzyme or the proteins or the enzyme is going to have an increased function, right? So your body will have a higher demands to work, right? So that way your body's not going to work. So it's lethal. So please, you also have that in mind, all right? Now, having said that, this Down syndrome, right? So far we talked about, what is it? This is a numerical. Remember, this all comes in what? Numerical disorders, right? This all falls in a numerical disorder. If you follow this, we haven't even talked about structure. But this Down syndrome, obviously there's exception. Majority of times it is caused by, right? This is caused by the numerical disorders. But this Down syndrome can also be caused by something called Robertsonian translocations, right? You must remember this. There's an unbalanced Robertsonian translocation can occur that can also give rise to Down syndrome. If they ask you about numerical, right? But remember, this Robertsonian translocation is not there's extra chromosome is there, because there is a translocation is there, unbalance, right? That can result in Down syndrome. But this is a structural abnormalities. So structural abnormalities can also give Down syndrome, right? Please remember this word. But major time is a numerical disorder that gives a condition called Down syndrome. And this numerical disorder, right, usually this caused by something called, during the meiosis process, right, there is a whole concept of non-disjunctions. One of the cause of these conditions is called non-disjunction. You must remember this word. We'll talk each one of them in a detail about how things happens. But this is like overall, different disorders that I'm giving it to you. Now, let's talk about what about the structural abnormalities, right? Whenever we're talking about the structural abnormality, that means that there's no problem with any of this. Let's just say there's a chromosomes here, right? There's a chromosome. What happens is sometimes there is in this structure, let's just write down here, there is a balanced translocations you can happen, right? Translocations you can happen, or you can have unbalanced translocations you can happen, right? Remember, if there's a balanced translocation, what does it mean? What do you mean by balance? That means that this, like, look, if you look at this, right? If you look at that, and we can make it in a blue and something. So if you do a crossover, right? Whenever you do the crossover on this and stuff, what happens is that there is a crossover that can happen. So usually, if I quickly make this, right? Let's just say, if I quickly make this, okay, this is normal, right? Like this one, right? But another one, maybe later, let's just say, this what happens. Look. And instead of here, you see pink right here like this? See, there's a crossover, there's a reciprocal translocations happens to these are basic, and these are what? This one and this one is same, but this one and this one is what? They're different, right? So they're basic, there's a crossover happens, the non-homologous, okay? No, this because they're not homologous means what? Similar to one another, right? That's what it means, right? That's what it means. But these are what? These are non-homologous, so they're not same, right? So whenever that happens, right, this is what is called, basically called reciprocal translocation. But in here, if there is a balanced translocation, meaning that there's no gain of genes, okay, or there's no loss of genetic information. So remember, whenever you use a balance, right, this means that there's no gain of additional extra genes, genetic information, or there's no loss of any extra genetic information. And if that happens in basically germline, right, basically in germline, then what happens is this, that if there's no, that means that, like for example, if that happens in my gene, right, my germline, that means I would not have a problem, but I can be a carrier. So I can send it to let's say my offspring, my child, right? So that's what balanced translocation means. But if there is let's just say that if there is a translocations happens, right, to the non-homologous gene, but in my somatic cells, in my body cells, then that can lead into what? Cancer. It's very important, right? And we'll talk about what are those main cancers that you have to talk about. There's this unbalanced translocation can happen, right? And if it happens like somatic cells and all, it can lead into cancer, right? Now, this type of unbalanced translocations, right?
especially something called Robertsonian translocation that can happen, especially in the Down syndrome, right? And that can happen in chromosome in the chromosome number 21. And what happens is that can give you this Down syndrome. Remember this, that whenever that you talk about this cytogenic or chromosome abnormalities, if you remember, these are all the disorder, right? What happens is that usually, the most commonly, you hear about the stillbirth or miscarriage, right? Or basically intellectual disabilities, right? Miscarriages or like stillbirth, right? It is actually caused by the chromosomal disorder that comes in the chromosomal abnormalities. So if you remember this, what are the chromosomal abnormalities can give it to? Think about miscarriages, think about stillbirth, right? Think about that, all this kind of stuff. And then you also have to think about so it can also give up cancer, like unbalanced translocations, right? That can give, if you have it in somatic cells, right? It can give a very, very important, translocations. Remember, this is cause of what? Translocations, right? And translocations could be inversion, it could be additions, all of that, or it could be deletions. But anyways, if there's a translocation is there, right? And so one genetic information puts on the other, that's called translocations, right? Now that translocations, usually you have to remember the 3 cancers that you have to remember. And those ones are, let me write down here. Have you heard about something called acute promyelocytic leukemia? This condition, acute promyelocytic leukemia. This one, okay, let me write down acute promyelocytic leukemia or CML, chronic myelogenous leukemia, and also Burkitt lymphoma, right? Very, very important. So remember, if there is a translocations, unbalanced translocations, right, that happens, that can basically result into condition called acute promyelocytic leukemia, CML, or Burkitt lymphoma. You must remember this, right? These are called, sometimes they also call it reciprocal translocations, right? They're called reciprocal translocations. Please remember, and this is happening in a somatic cell, all right? That's right. And remember, when I say, again, I'm repeating the definition. Balance, basically referring as what? Majority times, there is a majority of times, right? Almost like 85-90% times, there's a no gain or no loss of the genetic informations, right? That's why we call them a balance, right? Unbalance means there is what? There is either decrease or increase level of genetic informations, right? So there's unbalance that happens, and remember the word, this is on a non-homologous chromosomes, right? Like for example, I'll give you CML, right? This chronic myelogenous leukemia, usually that involves like chromosomes, let's just say this one is a 9 and this is 22, right? Chromosome number 9 and 22. There is a translocations of a, right, the gene, we call them Philadelphia chromosomes too, by the way, right? There's a translocations of two homologous, which are not similar to one another. They are not able to do crossover, but that happens, right? And that can give you a condition called chronic myelogenous leukemia, okay? This is called basic. And this structure abnormalities, right? The one that we just talked about. This whole concept is, please remember this, because they will ask you on your board exam. All of them, we call them a reciprocal. This is called reciprocal translocations. Very, very important, right? This is called reciprocal translocations, all right? And remember, if you want to remember the structure abnormalities, right, or this chromosome abnormalities, these are the one that gives stillbirth or miscarriage, recurrent miscarriage, right? Very, very important. Now, we talk about reciprocal translocation, but we also call them a Robertsonian translocation. Whenever we talk about Robertsonian translocations, right, let me tell you some stuff here. In our chromosomes, right, what happens is that there is something called, let me write down this, okay, let me make this chromosome like here, just follow this, right. In this chromosomes, right, usually there is this arm right here, this arm, which is this 2 arms, they're bound by this called centromere, right. This is called centromere, and this is called this arm, right. This is called short arm, and we usually abbreviate by P, okay, which means petite, right. And this long, we call them a long arm, and we call them a Q, okay.
and then they also have something called telomeres at the end, right? Now, what happens is that, in the karyotype, right, usually the chromosomes are basically numbered according to their length and then size, right? So which means that the chromosome number 1 is the largest, right? The largest. And maybe like chromosome number, like the last chromosome is the shortest, right? So usually chromosomes, so as like chromosome 1 will be the largest, right? Let's see if I make a largest like 1, second one would be like second largest, third would be like smaller than this, right? Like this. So this is 1, 2, 3, example like that, right? As the chromosome number gets like basically bigger, the size of the chromosomes also gets smaller. That's something that you remember. And usually the chromosome number 1, is, what do we call them? Because usually it looks something like this. It has like this, meaning the centromere is in the middle. So that means that both P and Q arms are equal length, right? It's because of sometimes they call this as a metacentric, all right? Metacentric. That's usually in the chromosome number 1 or 3, 2. But there are also chromosomes where the P arm is very, very short, right? If the P arm is very short and the Q arm is, let's say this is a P arm, right? We'll make this as a P arm is a very, very short, look at like this. But the Q arm is very long, right? So if that is the case, right? If that is the case, then we call them acrocentric chromosomes, right? What is this called? It's called acrocentric chromosomes. Please remember this. Acrocentric chromosomes. And you must remember though, what are those acrocentric chromosomes are? Because there is a clinical condition that are associated with this. These acrocentric chromosomes are basically 13, 14, 15, 21, and 22. Please remember these acrocentric chromosomes, right? Whenever there is if there's a translocations happens on one of those acrocentric chromosomes, right? Especially the P arms, then we call them they're called Robertsonian translocations, okay? So please remember the word acrocentric. Why acrocentric we're talking about? Because if you look at the P arms like this, right? These P arms are smaller, right, compared to Q arms. If we talk about metacentric, that means the P and Q arms are equal length because the centromere is in the center, right? There are other one too, like, sub-metacentric and all that stuff too. But mostly important for you to remember is the acrocentric chromosomes, which is 13, 14, 15, 21, 22. And here in the Robertsonian translocation, you could have a balance and unbalanced alterations. It's a very, very important thing for you to remember this, right? Remember, we are talking about, whenever we're talking about the structure, we're talking about balance. We're talking about the alterations, right? That's what we're talking about in the chromosomes, right? On a chromosome, that's what we're talking about, right? And that can give you a lot of these pathological conditions like this, Robertsonian translocations or acrocentric, or especially, that can happen in a Down syndrome, right? But remember, the majority of Down syndromes is caused by what? Non-disjunction, right? But it can be caused by this translocation also. Please remember the acrocentric one.